We do have a presenter with an illustrious military background, which includes starting on time. Starting on time is important to the lieutenant colonel, but we may have some folks. Nope, they're on a tour. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome everyone online. Thank you so much for joining us online. I think we have 16 or 17 folks who are joining us remotely, and we really appreciate your engagement in today's session. And on behalf of the FCI team, I'm really excited to introduce the group to Lieutenant Colonel Mike Rutherford, who is at Park as part of an internship experience through the Army Corporate Intern program, and he has been contributing in many and varied ways over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
3 weeks is accurate.
3 weeks.
Many and varied contributions.
And so, of course, one of the things that our team asked him to think about was facilitating a conversation around supporting military students. And so I know he's prepared something that will engage and inspire us. And so without further ado, I want to turn things over to Mike. Thank you again for presenting to us today.
Thank you for the kind intro. Well, good afternoon. Thank all of you for taking time to be at this workshop today. How many of you have had lunch?
In progress.
In progress, okay. I'm just curious because I'm using that as a gauge to see how sleepy you're likely to be during the presentation. I have cause for only guarded optimism regarding the entertainment value of this material, so please bear with me.
Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go ahead and throw the slides up there. All right, so for the next 90 minutes, we're going to talk about teaching those who serve. Right from the get-go, I'd like to hit you guys with some questions. Who am I referring to when I say those who serve, in your opinion?
Community leaders.
I'm sorry?
Community leaders.
Community leaders, good.
Military and military families.
Military and military families, very intuitive, good.
Military spouses.
Military spouses, excellent. Hey, my clicker isn't...
There you go.
Oh, there we go. So maybe soldiers, maybe sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen. Since 1973, the United States has relied on an exclusively volunteer source to staff the armed forces. I think we gave up on enforcing the registration for a potential draft in '83. The service in the military is often regarded as dangerous, inconvenient, disruptive to our domestic agendas, and yet young men and women keep volunteering to do it. Since 1973, regardless of the condition of the economy and regardless of the likelihood of armed conflict, the #1 most commonly cited reason by these men and women for volunteering to serve in the profession of arms is access to higher education. That is what you do. You provide higher education. You provide the motivation for these men and women to serve this country in the profession of arms. That's why I want to start today by thanking you for your service. It is you who, in the context of this discussion today, who serve. It is also this clicker which does not serve. There was this brilliant visual metaphor where I could say, there's no coincidence, could you be good enough to advance the slide? That it is your logo that is in the middle of this community of those who serve. We'll just dispense with trying to use this clicker, I think. But again, it is you who serve, and it is you who hopefully I will be able to goad into teaching one another today. Next slide, please. Let's talk about the agenda, mostly because this slide is entitled Agenda. By the way, I just want to say that this is an explosive display of creativity on my part. In that in the military context, thou shalt brief in Arial black. You will be in one of 3 fonts, be it your title, your supporting, or your sub-bullet. And that's the name of that tune, and you will not deviate from that. I forgot what the name of this font is, but it was something German, like Achenheim. It's very exciting. I was going to use the font that looked like bamboo, that had little leaves and stuff on it, but I was afraid. It's too bohemian. I couldn't do it. So on that note, next slide, please. We're going to take a look at the significance of the military learning in Park University. Next slide. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that are faced by our military learners. Now, these challenges are not unique to the military learner. You'll recognize almost all of them. They're not peculiar. However, I'm going to proceed on the assumption, which is not supported by any tangible research, that these challenges will manifest more in the population that we're calling the military learner than in other populations. You'll see, however, that there are some interesting overlaps with other populations. And I think that this assertion will correspond with your personal experience. Next slide. We'll take a look at some of the benefits that this population brings to our classrooms. And finally, because I've got 90 minutes and I'm an intern, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to hit every challenge, benefit, mitigating action, or leveraging technique. I'm pretty sure that a number of people in the audience today will have some salient observations of their own. Questions, comments, critique. Next slide, please. The more perceptive amongst you will recognize this as a graphic depiction of the 48 contiguous states of the United States of America. Do you have anybody from the political science department with us today? Perhaps at a remote location? Next slide. If you're from the political science department, you may perceive that this is a map of an entirely Republican United States, but in this you would be completely incorrect, perhaps for the best. Next slide. And next slide. It is, of course, actually a map that depicts pirate activity across the 48 states of North America. On that note, I cannot help but observe that this is the Parkville pirate is unique in the pirate community in that after establishing positions on the littorals and the inland waterways, they've progressed inland and established what I can only describe as a robust network of listening outposts and observation positions. It's pretty impressive for pirates, actually. These are not pedestrian pirates. Next slide. How many of you know that there are 41 learning centers in Park University? Yes, yes. How many of you know how many of those are located on military bases? Okay, you, Johnny on the inside, you better know.
Yeah, 36.
36, for a grand total of, I think, look at that. Next slide. 78% of this university is located on military bases. 78%. A quick glance at the map might suggest that this is actually a shadow organization run by the Air Force, but it's not the case.
Yeah.
Next slide. 65% of our student body are military learners. Now, I am a professional logistician, but only in that I work for the Army, which should tell you something about any assumptions you made about my skills as a logistician. That being said, the notion of statistical significance has always been elusive to me. But in Rutherford mathematics, if you're more than half, odds are you've achieved statistical significance. And after at least 15 seconds of uninterrupted thought, I concluded that 65 is more than half. Ergo, we are discussing a statistically significant portion of our student body. Next slide. Some of you are probably thinking that seems a little high. This 65% are military learners. Well, next slide. Rest assured, next slide, they're all pirates, regardless of their military affiliation. Next slide. Andar is the king of the pirates, whose activities we'll probably discuss in some different venue at a later time. Next slide. So when I say 65% of the student body, who am I talking about? Well, there's these guys. Next slide. Active service members. They're easy to spot, generally in good shape, generally dressed strangely, and generally they have short hair. Easy spot. But that's not 65%. Next. Who's the military learner in this photo? Well, okay, again, Rutherford math. There's two people in a photo. One of them's in a uniform. Odds are probably the one in the uniform. However, that other guy, that photo bomber, next slide, the spouse is also considered a military learner. Their learning patterns are affected by the active military member in the household. Their funding streams often parallel or are identical to the active military member of the household. Anybody from life sciences, biology? Okay, again, no research. However, I am going to opine that the majority of military learners in park are mammals. Most of us know that mammals reproduce sexually. What happens after photographs like this are taken? Next slide. Next slide. Children happen. Imagine my embarrassment after having 3 when the doctor explained to me why this miracle was visited upon me. Yes, they happen. And like spouses, their access to higher education is often governed by the same dynamics that affect the rest of the military family. Next slide. Wow, you double tapped that one. Okay, I had a whole line built in there, but that's okay. Paint what you feel. Before anybody makes any unflattering assumptions about this photograph, I will tell you that, truth in lending, this guy is really a military retiree. I found him on the web in an article about military retirees. I didn't just find a photo of a guy with salt and pepper hair and a comb over. He's the real deal. That is the specimen in its natural environment. Next slide. And these other guys. A lot of the times we think cadets are, they're like junior officers. They're like trainees or something. They're young and they're not as military as these other guys. Well, yeah and no. On part, I was just talking to Mr. Abel from the Global Warrior Center right here on post. We'll be mentioning that name and that facility periodically today. He pointed out to me that there are 17 ROTC cadets that are right here at Parkville, and that out of those 17, only 3 or 4 are actual straight cadets. The others, 14, being in what's called the Simultaneous Membership Program, SNP. They're in the National Guard. That means that they are indistinguishable from our first group, active service members. They're simultaneously active service members and officer cadets. We'll talk about the importance of their involvement as a cadet as it affects the learning environment momentarily. But don't discount those guys. Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay, next slide. I got to put the word diagonally also. That was kind of exciting because you don't violate the horizon in a military brief, okay?
Yeah.
It's 90 degrees, it's Euclidean, let's not go crazy. But in this environment, this tie, that slope, it's crazy time.
Yeah.
Breakout, and an exclamation point. That was almost like dramatic. Next slide. Who is that man?
Steve McQueen.
Steve, you may move to the front of the class. That's Steve McQueen. Why do I have a picture of Steve McQueen next to the word breakout?
Great escape.
Thank you.
I'm
You
so
have
glad you're
redeemed
here.
your nation. Why do the rest of you hate your country? Yes. Next slide. Only the 4th or 5th best film ever made where he depicts a veteran who breaks out from a Luftstalag, a German Air Force POW camp. How could you not know this? I didn't major in film. I'm a little angry. You guys have kind of thrown me, hey, remote guys listening in silence, thanks, good looking out. Steve, where do I go from here? Ask them to list the challenges faced by military learners. Thank you, Stephen. The reason I invited you. Let's break out for about 5 minutes. I want you to divide into groups. Yeah, you cats, you're good. You are an army of 3. You're good right where you sit. We're going to break for 5 minutes. I want you to brainstorm about challenges you think the military learners are facing, and we'll reconvene and we'll review our lists and scrub your lists against my list in 5 minutes. Let's break.
Do we want to do it with introductions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Kayla here.
Brian.
I teach the military social work class here.
You better know how many.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I was ready for that one.
Right, different sounds altogether.
So the idea has to do with the difficulty
Entry or something.
in the research and experience show that
It's hard for a class, but also it's really
stressful
technically hard, because sometimes they literally, I feel like they're not
most stressful
very
typically is the transition back home when they
So
leave
the
Apple Watch to duty.
Yeah, I guess
So
that's
a lot of that.
yeah. Yeah, I think that technically it makes it
a lot of
difficult to decide, like,
How do they fit into the
they withdraw.
civilian culture after being in very different military culture for so long? It's a real challenge. And then things have changed here at home. The spouse and the kids have taken over all the jobs at home, so they can kind of.
Brother-in-law, I wonder sometimes, years
Yeah, I
in
think
some of
so.
our maybe and leave things
Yeah, and
emotionally
I think
ambiguous.
they're serious when they come to
Feel out
classes.
of
I
problem
think
or
probably
discarded
more so
by
serious
that
in
I
general.
want.
Usually at least his initial undergrad
Civilian
classmates that
students.
got
So they really feel they're trained
program
to
further
really
along in his
take things
discipline. I think
seriously
he had
and
more
do things on
sessions.
time.
He was
And
having classes
so,
with
so,
use those initial
you know, sometimes they have
undergrad
problems with, you know, the other students
classes.
being
Really young. He
It's
did
pretty
fairly
unstructured.
They're-
That helpful to their learning.
a lot more focused.
Practically, it's helpful.
Yeah.
He was doing. So
Yeah.
I
So
don't
that's what I
think
would
it's
start out with. Yeah, so what do you think?
Yeah.
the interpersonal relationships.
I think one of the issues for those
For
who are
spouses, gotta come to spouses
deployed,
in my
this has been
classroom.
my observation too, is
Our service members are deployed, so they're trained to be students and they're the sole provider for the household.
And they're scared for
Yeah,
their
and
loved ones.
the stress that comes along with that.
Right. Yeah,
Those are face to face
I
or
can see that
online?
too.
Yeah.
Now, one of the advantages of us having these
Mom of 4 kids.
36
She's just
sites
4
out there
children.
is that, you know, the spouse can continue to take classes, even if they are moved
It's
to
an
a
interesting
different
thing when you
base.
teach online. I know who the military people are first because the introduction. They always say
The
it.
VR at the end.
Yeah, well, they always sign off the but I do find sometimes forgetting that as the course goes, and then sometimes having something to remind you. Yeah, they
No, I'm
can
gonna
because
stay
they're
here.
there.
Yeah.
Right. That's always a charm. I always wonder, like, should I be more intentional when I teach those online classes?
You
But
don't get to
the
tell
ones
them
are
that
military,
you
ones aren't.
have to go. If they say go. So it's training everything that takes place.
I'm sure I've had lots of military.
Yeah, so I think that would be disruptive for if the spouse is taking college classes or the kids are in school, so they have to switch schools. So there is that disruption of spouse and if the active duty is taking
I see that too.
But I think that's where the having the online sites means that they can maybe
Transition in the
One's
next
here.
city,
I
they could
feel like
just
I haven't had a
hop
military
online.
someone here.
and continue with what they've been working on. So I think that's one of the really good things about the system.
I have one guy online.
But I think it is hard for the kids if they have to move, you know, every year, every 2 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's tough for children.
That's just how we. Well, and I know there have been some.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
we
I
talk
don't
about,
know if it-
like
I
if they
agree
need an
that all of
assignment. So when I think about challenges, I'm actually
It's the same way.
They're going to like national different
Yeah.
again or whatever, and they need is the assignment. I don't know
Jump in.
Yeah.
That's how they
But
should do it.
having,
Right.
you know, like when you have National Guard duty, is that you know that weekend you're not gonna be able to, or when you're gonna be on duty, is knowing that week's coming, so.
They have different competencies, right? Like, you know, they're trying to like be conscientious.
Our time when they have duty, they have duty, and it's not like, they'll take some challenges.
Being in the classroom challenges are like,
Okay, we're coming up on the end of our breakout window here. You're about 30 seconds out. So look at finalizing your
So
list.
you fall back into that, sitting in a classroom where you can't see the.
I love a couple of
I mean, I think it's so good that we have these 36 sites where the military or family
Knowing where
can
the door is.
just get their higher education.
And I thought
Just that ruling. So it's ridiculously nuts.
He's retired athletics, and his daughter is gonna get scholarships.
That's another good point.
Yeah, but like 20 minutes.
There's loud banging and some radiators.
Yeah, I mean, it can.
Yeah.
Students who are military, with military background, we try to bridge learning.
I didn't join my breakout room because I'm also logged in online to help just look at the chat. No, I'm just looking at the chat.
Is there,
Another set of eyes.
is there chat happening?
There's a chat.
I lack the aptitude, the familiarity with
Yeah.
the system,
Oh, yeah,
letting me
that's
know
good.
and see
Our
what
knowledge
people are
base is different
texting.
than most people.
Yeah.
Are they talking? Are they saying, "Oh God, how long will this guy talk?"
Yes, that's exactly what they're saying.
Where do they find this guy?
Like in training.
It's really not some great escape.
I
We need to put this on a.
It's been.
I imagine so. It's another challenge.
Midnight.
The other movie I've been shamed about is it called Shame?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Right.
I know, we're working on it.
like really,
We're
I've
working
just lost so much respect
Well,
for
moving
him.
back to college a little bit.
Go and do as they're told. It's
Okay.
not they get to go.
Let's take a look first at the conclusions that we have drawn. Are we reconvened?
We are reconvened.
Okay, I should have a gavel so I could, like, you know, do some kind of symbolic act of reconveningness. Let's go to one of our remote locations. I'd like to do two of those up front. One of the remote locations. Can you tell us real quick, just run us down your list?
This is Donna Morgan. If you can hear me, I'll run down the list our group came up with. Work schedules such as deployment, which also, by the way, don't affect just the military, impacts the spouses if they're going to school, trying to find a babysitter or things of those natures. TDYs, the government budget shutdown impacted those that hadn't gotten TA in the past few years. When there's inspections or exercises going on a base, it impacts their work schedules. There can be changes of security on the base, so it may be tougher for, let's say, a veteran to get on the base if they're not a retired military person. They served in the military, they're going to school, they're using their GI Bill benefits, but they don't have access to the base. Those were just some of the ones that we came up with.
Excellent, excellent list. Another one of our remote locations. What did you guys get?
Thank you,
Hi,
Mike.
this is Cicely at Cherry Point. We obviously deployment, shift work, workups, less the field ops, I guess, on the Army side is what you guys would call it, where they're gone less than 4 months, for anywhere from 6 weeks to 4 months. They're geographically separated from family and a support system, and that really impacts a lot of our students here because they don't have babysitters a lot of times. Command support, if the command doesn't support off-duty education, that impacts a lot of them as well. And then, at the end of the day, money.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Let's go to one of the groups we have here. Who wants to go first out of these? You guys, you cats in the corner, the gang of three.
Yeah, so some of the things that have already been shared were things that we talked about as well, such as the scheduling challenges. We also noted, Jamie brought up different financial burdens related to the shutdown, but also just, confirming whether or not you'll receive proper assistance. We brought up interpersonal relationships as well, particularly once students are in the classroom, that occasionally our service members might not necessarily feel that they have a lot in common with students immediately, like straight out of college or straight out of high school in the classroom, particularly if they're coming back at a later point. So making those connections can be challenging. And then also communication, the way that you communicate on base or in the military is not necessarily the same way that we talk within a classroom. And so that can also be challenging as well, making sure everyone understands one another.
Excellent, excellent. And by all means, as we go through this comparing of our lists, please do not hesitate to say something because it's already been said. Part of the reason I want to scrub our list is I want to see what perceptions we all share. The reason I want to hear every list is also because there's always that one or two outlying issues that we all hear and we think, yeah, that too. So by all means, please be exhaustive in reciting the contents of your lists. On that note, let's go back out to one of our outstations. I think we have 5, right?
Yes.
Hey, Bill Broom here in Auburn, Alabama. I teach online. One of the things I've had is students that are deployed. They're over in Iraq or Afghanistan, so in addition to, carrying a weapon all the time, they try and get their course done during the term. And sometimes they have good internet depending on where they're at, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes you may not hear from them for a couple of days because of any type of whatever the OPSEC is at the location there.
Excellent, excellent. Who wants to go next here?
I think the only other thing that was mentioned in our group that hasn't already been mentioned is the re-entry after deployment, sort of the reverse culture shock that happens when a family has, kind of picked up and making all the decisions and those kind of things. And then here comes the service member trying to re-enter the family, re-enter sort of normal life outside of deployment, and what that looks like in the transition that takes place and the stress that it adds to relationships and just in general life.
Excellent, excellent. A time when everyone thinks, oh, it's time to get back to normal. Oh, the hard part is done. Sometimes maybe that's where some of the greatest challenges reside, because we don't expect them. That's not how we stereotype that delightful moment. And yet, there's a lot of stress hidden in there. Let's go back out to one of the remote locations.
There's a lot of stress on the home front also when an individual's gone on a deployment, and also in the chat mode I put most of the things of deployment exercises, military duties, 24/7 operation, family demands. You need to understand the student and their background and be able to help enable their educational goals. And also a lot of times you PCS and you try to figure out if you can complete your degree or not, and Park is good with that. And also, like I said earlier, you have to make sure of what the student is going through and try to help them as they go through that process.
Excellent. Excellent subject.
Also, another thing is to understand military jargon and acronyms and to be able to speak some of the military speak that we do.
Definitely, definitely. It occurs to me as we go through this workshop, I'm beginning to suspect that a lot of the participants already have a habitual affiliation with this population. That's why they came to this workshop. And I'm going to say this now. If I don't remember to say it again at the end, somebody nag me, call me out about it. I guess already, to put the cart before the horse, one of the most important lessons is going to be our ability, our willingness and our ability to explain many of these issues, which are decidedly nuanced, to our colleagues who lack this familiarity with this population. That might be one of the biggest takeaways. Big gang in the corner, power table. You guys had like more people than any other group, so lay it on me.
We talked about the culture shock also. And then in my own classes, I've had students that like in the military, I told them I kind of pray for military students. But then when it comes to projects, they already expect more. So one of the challenges would be like when they have to work with someone who hasn't had the training they have, it's like conflict inside the group because they expect more, which I like, but it is an issue.
I think we'll have an opportunity to develop that notion a little bit in a slide or two. Excellent point. What else? That's not your whole list. Somebody's got a list.
We talked about, in addition to deployments and some of the other things that were mentioned, some of the physical challenges of the classroom if you're in a face-to-face class. I talked about one of the things I've had a few students struggle with is if they're in a classroom like this, for example, and the door is to their back. Some students have a really big issue with that. It makes them really uncomfortable and it disrupts their learning.
Yep.
It certainly can. So some of those physical things.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that? So Katie, our GA, used to work in the Warrior Center, and she said that when it was underground, a lot of the military people didn't like it because it was underground. I remember like doing the bunkers, so then it was moved above ground.
Yeah, one of the first things they told me about when the Warrior Center was in the underground was that they were still doing low levels of demolition.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, some service members found that reminiscent of other things they had experienced. And I thought, you know, it's on one hand, it is laughable. It's like, yeah. On the other hand, there's nothing remotely intuitive about that. If you haven't been in that situation or been around people who have been in that situation, you would say, wait, let me get this straight. Being in something like a parking garage is a problem? Really? You know, how do you park at Sears? You know, so this we're going to be looking at this razor's edge the whole time we go through this discussion about, well, if you know the deal, it's obvious. But if you don't know the deal, it's not obvious. A lot of these things. And again, a lot of the things that we're mentioning, actually, you guys have done an outstanding job of zeroing in on things that are peculiar to the military learner. But you've also mentioned a lot of things that could manifest in other populations. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. I've lost track. Have we hit all of our remote locations?
I think we've hit 4.
Remote number 5. Remote number 5. Please respond if you're receiving this signal. You guys got a list? Somebody out there have a list they haven't read?
I'm in California, and I can share a few things. I put them in the chat because I wasn't connecting with my group. But kind of on a more holistic level, because I've been teaching combination classes at 2 colleges for a few years now. And I can totally understand some of the frustrations of the students that come into the classroom. Because when I first got out, it just seemed like everybody is so picky and so peculiar. And oh my gosh, you know, that's important. No, that's, you know, it just, there's a lot of things that really add up and become frustrating for vets in the classroom. And it sometimes takes years to get to the point where you can appreciate regular life again and all the little things that people deal with day to day. And I find having a sense of humor, I always find out who my vets are right away and kind of tease them a little bit and try to show them as subject matter experts when they are, and kind of link them up in positive ways, and try to express, I totally know where you're coming from, and don't think that you need to go and jump back into the military. This is going to feel weird for a while, and stick with it. It'll be worth it. So on a holistic level, there's just a lot of issues that can really eat people up and affect their ability to come in and deal with class sometimes.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of things that are interesting. Would it be correct to characterize your early comments as sometimes a military learner might find the lack of urgency in other students vexing?
Oh yes, yeah.
We'll hit on that in a second. That sense of urgency about what is the task. Explain the task. You've explained the task. I now want to complete the task. Let's do it. Why are you playing Pokemon Go? That's not the task. Let's finish the task. We'll talk about that in a second. And the other thing you mentioned that got my attention in a big hurry was when you said you try to find out who your military learners are early on. That notion will figure prominently in a lot of the mitigating skills or mitigating options that instructors enjoy and ways to leverage the strengths that they bring. If you don't know who they are, a lot of these techniques will evade you. But the good news is the general assumption is getting to know your students. Well, that's almost universal. I don't think it matters what discipline you're teaching. You should always strive to know your students, so there's really no conflict. In a way, it's delightful that we're stating the obvious, because the solutions to a lot of these problems or the mitigating techniques are rooted in things that we should already be striving to achieve anyways. We're not creating a conflict. Next slide, please. Let's look at the stuff that I cooked up in a vacuum. This is the tricky one. I had 4 taps, I think. There we go. Opportunities to learn are fragmented. You guys hit that all up and down. PCSs, yeah. Every 24 to 36 months, the federal government has decided, probably based on some really odd science, that they're going to maximize our performance by forcing us to relocate our households. I'm sorry, did my opinion slip out? My bad. Every 24 to 36 months, we move. It's not like they moved the School of Infantry. It's not like they moved the National Training Center. No, but we're going to move, and our kids are going to move, and our wives are going to move, and our dogs are going to move. Yeah? Every 24 to 36 months. Your average undergraduate degree, again, 0 research. I think about 4 years, right? But wait, the more perceptive amongst you will perceive that that interval is longer than the interval that characterizes the relocation of the household. That's just the tip of it. Then you have other planned events. All of our guardsmen, 2 weeks a year, right? 1 weekend a month. They're out. You've got unplanned events, such as declarations of war, hostilities. You have natural disasters like Katrina. You have social disasters like the riots in Los Angeles right after the Rodney King trial. I had classmates, dating myself. I have to date myself. Who else would? But they got mobilized by the state of California to go to Los Angeles to augment state police forces in California to mitigate the destructive effects of social disruption in California. And they were not given incompletes by professors at San Diego State who were being paid by the government of California. So you got one part of the government kind of failing to reinforce the efforts of the other. Specific judgment calls notwithstanding, the misalignment is unmissable. It's absolute. They are not aligned. Who should adjust who? That's a political question. Knock yourself out. I'm just saying these don't match. And the students in the middle. Those compounded further. The need for lengthy medical treatments. The opportunity to go to what we call a low-density school, where you have an incredibly expensive and uncommon option, and if you act now, you can exploit it, and it'll have a very real impact on your career. It's not a cruise. It's not a vacation. But the guy who was supposed to go to that course, he got some kind of upper respiratory tract infection. You can go, if you can go right now. So you look at these challenges and you say, well, as a teacher, how am I supposed to address this issue? This is a lifestyle issue. This is beyond the scope of my abilities. I'm only in charge of this little room. To which I would say, one of the biggest mitigating factors that you can take, one of the biggest mitigating measures you can take, does not require external funding, does not require augmented political authority. It requires nothing except a decision on your part to affiliate every episode or event on your syllabus with a calendar date. Having a syllabus available to a military learner on day 1 of your class that is measured not by week 1 of the class, week 2 of the class, week 3 of the class, meeting number 12, meeting number 13, meeting number 14, but rather this month and this day, and this month and this day, and this month and this day, in regular calendar language, is incredibly beneficial because it allows the military learner to sit down on day 1 and start to look for scheduling conflicts with all of the planned components, with all of the planned disruptions, the annual rotation, the annual exercise, the drills, all of that. Further, knowing the policies that regulate your decision as an instructor, just knowing the policy is a huge mitigating factor. You can de-ambiguify a situation immediately. When a student says, I have to go to this city and assist in storm recovery operations. I am going to be gone for a period of not less than 36 days. What can I do? Saying, well, we have a policy. If you're on military orders, I can give you an incomplete, done deal. Or saying, I don't know, let me get back to you. You're not affecting the policy, but your knowledge of the policies that govern your latitude, that can remove ambiguity from the situation quickly. It can help a military student decide whether they need to disenroll quickly, depending on the time of the semester, before they can recover the money they'll lose if they don't finish your class. And we'll talk about finite time and finite money later. But just trying to mitigate the ambiguity helps the military learner. And the calendar is your friend. Next. Benefit stream. A couple of you have already mentioned the different types of money or the different mechanisms that are in place to help our military learners pay for their classes. They're numerous. There are enlistment incentives. There are re-enlistment incentives. There's the GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill. People who are in the State Guard receive tuition at accredited universities. There are numerous funding streams. The average military learner's knowledge of these streams, these options, is no more comprehensive than the average student's knowledge of all the scholarships that are available. Just because they are exploiting a given income stream doesn't mean it is the only one available to them, and they are frequently unaware of that fact. I'm not going to tell you that you should cultivate a comprehensive knowledge of these income streams. You probably have enough on your plate already. What I'm going to tell you, though, is that it's incredibly beneficial if you know where that information resides on your campus. At Park University, it's at the Global Warrior Center. We think of this as an office that's there primarily for the benefit of the student, but they are also there for the benefit of every instructor in Park. If you can tell a student who says they're thinking of dropping out because of financial difficulty that they need to check with the Warrior Center, you're doing that student a huge service. That center wants to hear from them. That center, as often as not, according to a recent discussion I had with the management, is able to identify alternative streams of income for those students. Just knowing that that option exists is enough. Next. Goal anxiety. Hardly unique to military learners, yeah? How many of us have students that are not military learners that don't know what they want to be when they grow up? I haven't even cleared that one up myself. I'm dangerously close to like halfway with my life expectancy. I should probably figure this out. I haven't. We think of people who are in the military and we think they know what they're doing. Well, by and large, they do. The military can create a very clear comfort area very quickly, where a member will know what they are supposed to do and what they are able to do. They'll enjoy a very high level of self-assurance that they're able to do it. It's a two-sided coin. It's a double-edged blade. Your comfort zone very quickly can have a very high wall around it, as your military learner can't envision themselves doing anything else as well as they do this. It creates a recalcitrance, a hesitancy to leave. As long as I'm here, I'm good. I got this. Well, when you start pursuing a degree, you're on a clock. And at the end of that clock, you know, the little button sticking in you is going to come out like a turkey. You're done. You're going to have to leave the building and turn left, turn right, or go towards the horizon. You got to make a choice about what you want to do when you leave school. It's very real for all of our learners. But for military students, there's a further slope in their gradient in that they have a little identity that's already solid. And you got to encourage them to step out of that. You got to remind them that while they have achieved excellence in their current job, there's a world that requires excellence elsewhere that surrounds them. They can capitalize on what they've achieved and use it to augment further development. Next slide. And the next one. And the next one. I want to look at these two together. Cultural isolation and difficulty integrating. When people look at that combination of variables, does it remind any of us of another student demographic?
International students.
Wait a minute, was that the Steve McQueen guy? Okay. All right. Yeah, you've been identified as competent. Right. When we do group projects, you're so on the hook to be in charge of one. Yeah, international students. And when I say international, obviously we're in North America, so generally I'm referring to people from cultures not in North America. I'm painting in broad strokes. We have a tradition of providing accessible higher education at Park. We pride ourselves on our level of international involvement. It's not a hard value to spot on this campus. It's not difficult to pick up on. Is it possible as an instructor to cultivate a comprehensive knowledge of every cultural variable, of every cultural imperative, of every intercultural disconnect that can affect our students? Can you do that?
No.
Who said it? Thank you, A, for facilitating my leading question, and B, thank you for just throwing it out there. There will be no penalty for wrong answers. Sorry I didn't make that clear. It's absurd. You can't know all that stuff. Most of us have a hard time achieving a high level of competency, mastering the nuances of our own culture. No, it's cool that you're yawning. I know, it doesn't mean important. Yeah, our own culture. Some of us never master the nuances. Now we're going to master the nuances of every culture of every student on the campus. It's not possible, not remotely possible. It's not even testable, right? So what do? We just leave them in the wind? No, we do not. We cultivate an appreciation for the idea that there might be a cultural dimension to a student's challenges. We cultivate a sensitivity to the notion that when you're in a foreign country and you're not surrounded by your fellow citizens who are in the same cultural context as you, that it might form challenges, that it might derail your whole cognitive process. We cultivate a sensitivity to the possibility, not to the 600,000 eaches, because we can't. All right, so we got these military learners. They're not from another country. Actually, a lot of them are, but that's beside the point. Let's go ahead and focus on the ones that are from North America. All right, so deliberate. We'll put blinders on for a second. They're not from another country. They eat the same food. They speak the same language. They use the same slang. They drive the same cars. Come on. Those are all relatively superficial cultural icons. Even language, one of the most observable differences, is relatively superficial in regards to culture, which is, it deals with that unspoken, that inarticulated, those values, the core. Well, I opine that the totality and the intensity of military inculcation is such that it actually achieves a cultural level of significance. It imbues in its members, largely, core values that are inherently and measurably different from the core values of people selected at random from any given street corner or any given classroom. Military culture is, as my daughter, the intellect, would say, a thing. If you don't believe me, talk to a Marine and then talk to an airman. And share your thoughts. Yeah, not only are the cultures different within the military, but certainly between the military. These are not superficial and symbolic. They are meaningful. So, what am I saying? You should all join the service and get culturally competent. Yeah, that'll work, right? We all have time for that. Not remotely. Absurd. None of you challenge that assumption? I didn't give you time. Okay, my bad. No, but you must cultivate your sensitivity to the notion. When you see a military learner struggling, you should deliberately ask yourself if their struggles are rooted in some way, perhaps in their military identity or in something else. And this invisible culture, this military culture that looks like ours and sounds like ours, but is different, well, they have an embassy on post. Again, it's that Global Warriors Center. It's the embassy from Military Culturica, okay, from that odd peninsular state. They are not just there for military learners, they are there for you. They want you to ask them for their opinion. They are ready to assist you in an assessment of your situation. You can go in and you can describe a situation and they will render an assessment. If you want, they will come to your classroom and observe the dynamic in action and give you a more informed assessment. They want to do this. They want you to exploit their potential. Next slide. How are we doing for time? Where are we at? Okay. In the interest of time, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. It's already time for another break. How many of you are glad? Come on. Several of you are lying. Just so you know, several of you are lying. Okay. You weren't ready for the pattern last time, and I let your decidedly sluggish response times get under my skin. I was a little disappointed, but I think you're ready for the pattern this time. I think time to level up. Next slide. Not you. Who is this man?
Snake Plissken.
Hey, oh, you said Kurt Russell. Remote location. You say Snake Plissken?
Snake Plissken.
God bless you. Yes, it's Kurt Russell and Snake Plissken. You're both right. Why is Snake Plissken or Kurt Russell, lifelong, I think common law marriage to Goldie Hawn from Laugh-In, right? Got to start with Disney. Why is he next to the word breakout? Anybody? Okay, yeah, you can jump in on this one.
Escape from New York.
Well, only the best film, next slide, ever made, the capstone of Western culture, the film which everyone in this room and everyone who can hear me has seen, even if they try really hard not to remember. I point out, well, yes, except for the technician who denies ever having seen it. I submit that if you were forced, and you'd have to be forced, to watch the film, you'd say, oh, it's this movie. Yeah.
I was going to say, were you?
Don't let her off the hook. Don't say, no, kids these days.
Well, it was made earlier. It took place in the future.
Yeah.
So.
That's right, in the frightening future of 1997.
Yeah.
It didn't really turn out like that, by the way. The head of the Statue of Liberty, A, is much smaller than that, and B is still mounted on top of the statue. By the way, Snake Plissken, he is a veteran in the film. The scholars amongst you will know this. All right, I digress. Snake, I got a little excited. They clutched in, but I lost my way again. Where do we go from here? Ask them to list the various benefits military learners often bring to the classroom. Snake, I knew there was a reason I invited you. Thank you. So let's break for 5 and list the benefits that this group brings to our classrooms and maybe how to leverage those.
Organizational skills.
There's also a sequel.
I think they would bring utilizing those already talked about some of the
Surfing.
Very respectful. Yeah. Ability to.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And then, okay, you told us to do this.
No, it was right before I was born.
Asking the
Yeah.
questions. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they didn't give you one benefit. Just want you to cover the topic.
You know, just local.
Yeah,
That's good.
I mean, they do tend to specialize. I guess it depends on the size special. So they tend to be older. So they kind of tend to bring the benefits of adults sometimes anyway. Yeah.
You guys let your classes pick their own groups, or do you?
Yeah,
I try to.
And so for them, it's like, oh,
there's a chat going on.
So that's what I shouldn't do. Is you just let chaos figure it out.
So would you like to put all the military students together?
yeah, in there. And then I would also add kind of
Oh, yeah, that's generation.
They're already one.
you know, they take stuff serious.
Yeah.
Well, that's your list.
Yeah. Kayla's got a different list too. She's got a list. It's not.
I was just, I'm not saying, I'm just saying. I had to read a list. That urgency, that urgency. I just wanted you to. About your cultural insights. You gotta be spinning.
I clearly have done my homework on this. Yeah.
It's your job for
That's true. That's something I want to be known for. The guy that watches all the movies.
You know, personal essays from different, you know, authors from different cultures and things. And I just find sometimes a higher than average to talk about intercultural conflict or just recognition of how culture influences.
Yeah. You know, talk about speeches, right? So they have to talk about some controversial things.
Yeah.
Like they're able to stay respectful and that wider the chat there to acknowledge what you said.
Specifically in English, they all one of the challenges I don't have anything to write about. You know, like if they have to write a personal narrative or they, I don't know, a topic, you know, they just always say, I don't know what to write about. And the military students always have something to write. Like,
Yeah, that experience.
Yeah.
Focus and you, I mean, it just challenged my
Usually if you're pursuing
stereotype that you're very much more rigid in their thinking too. But it's, I mean,
And that's why
reading and writing is like that. Challenged my, maybe my preconceived notion. Very rigid and
creative problem solvers for sure.
Yeah.
They're the only ones. So the online class has an audience. But in particular,
Oh, I know. And this is
they're never the ones that say they can't find an
Yeah.
audience. They always find a way, no matter how difficult it is. They're the ones that always find a way. And so they're the creative problem solvers.
What's the name for a thing that works sort of like the Global Warrior Center and all the other campuses?
Well, I mean,
Because we get some chat.
yeah, generally, I think that that chat was sort of chiming in to say that many of our adjunct faculty themselves are military service members, so they kind of bring a knowledge there that supplements what the students would get. The campus directors and the academic directors are also there.
Even if they have a lot to learn.
There may be like a
White
not specific to Park, but just available through the ESO's office.
I don't think it's obvious to the remote audience that I'm here for like, so I'm not trying to snub.
Oh, yeah.
So
No, we have
It's all
I'll
good.
just open with a inoculatory comment.
Don't even worry about it.
Hey, man, you guys are all in it to win it.
Yeah. I noticed on the screen, one of them was Cynthia. I think she's in San Antonio or Austin.
A wider
That
audience.
is so cool.
They do a lot of work with like our HR club, and there's a couple different ones trying to grow the military students at those campuses in Texas.
Yeah, I think he's just saying, don't forget about the campus centers that work with military students. Just means that there's, you know, the military campus centers, there's just a lot of military
do it in a
people.
very holistic way.
Yeah, it's not a separate center, but yeah.
Recursive
Yeah.
research process.
Don't worry.
but I mean,
I know, like,
it does seem like they are.
she gave me some information and I gave it to her.
They're also very willing to work.
Starbucks
Yeah.
used to pay 50%
Oh, yeah.
reimbursement, but now they pay 100%. So I told this girl, I was like,
I always say,
switch through work.
come to me to get help. but
You have to go to Arizona.
Arizona State, I was
Yeah.
gonna say.
Online.
Yeah, it's just.
And she said, well, I was in the military, so I'm thinking about looking at that. And I was like, I'll have my friend call you. She'll give you some information. And like 3 weeks later, she works here in the Leader Center now, going to school here, but she works here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of that willingness.
And it's
Usually,
actually
you know,
their house.
I have handouts, they hang on the handouts.
And her house. Yeah, it doesn't work. It worked out really well for her. She didn't even know, even after all the good things we had, that when we had was going to be eligible for those programs. It was a lot more than she thought. Completely changed her living circumstances. With Gulmira is the one that gave her the information and got her going. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure about their reach online. I know that's some things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they do some degree of like email and counseling, because one thing that's cool about Parks Warriors.
Okay, we're about 30 seconds out from reconvening.
Yeah,
You've
it's
just
not
found
just
us
like
online, you know, you just want someone to talk to.
Yeah.
I've always thought that was neat.
They, Sarah Waken works over there, and she's doing a lot of stuff in that new crew, which is like the new chat thing. And so maybe that's what they're talking about. But I know I see her name posting in crew because I post HR stuff in there, and she posts Warrior Center stuff. So I think she's doing that.
Okay, so we're reconvening. I want to start by reaffirming that I am speaking about most of these issues in the context of Park Campus at Parkville. This is an artifact of the fact that I've only been an intern here for about 14 days. And it's not a deliberate attempt to diminish or detract from the efforts that are going on throughout the entire Park University, not by any means. So please don't confuse my lack of proficiency with a lack of respect for everyone's efforts, all right? Lest it be said. I want to start with input from Doug. Apparently he was having some trouble getting on. I want to share his list.
Oh, Dale?
Dale. Okay, amongst his list of strengths that military learners bring: military training, learning experience, discipline, knowledge, teamwork, core values, ability to adapt, a desire to learn. That's an excellent list. I like it because it corresponds with a lot of the stuff that I was going to say, and I'm basically selfish and, you know, sort of narcissistic. So of course I like that list. What else have we got? You guys here in the corner.
We said a lot of those. We noted that in classes where there are multiple students from the military, they seem to develop a kind of camaraderie and help each other out. We also noticed that we've seen a lot of military learners who are willing to ask for help, or at least more willing than other types of students to ask for help and to sit there until they get what they're looking for. And then we also said that military life is a really rich subject to explore with whatever course concepts you're looking at. So I teach writing, and you know, the issue of acronyms or specialized vocabulary is a rich subject for a research paper in a writing class.
Excellent, excellent. Power group in the back.
Well, to Glenn's point, yeah, the range of experience can be really fruitful content for them in writing or in public speaking. Or I was just saying that the military students always have a subject to talk about or write about, whereas a lot of students just kind of chew on their pencil and say, I don't know what to write about. They're also, not, it's been said, but task-oriented, also creative problem solving, that instead of, I forget how Kayla put it, but just willing to sort of work on it until the problem gets solved, even if that means having to be creative about it.
Okay, excellent. Let's go back out to one of our remote stations.
Hi, this is Janet. We had listed that they're more mature than some of the students. seems like sometimes they're willing to work harder. They're more likely to be a leader in a group project. They're motivated to get their degree, so they may have a little bit more motivation to get things done. They bring a lot of real life experiences to the classroom. And most of them have experience working with different cultures, which also helps with a diverse classroom setting. And then also most of them have time management skills, since they do have families, job obligations. Adult learners have other things going on, so they may, if they have a group project, instead of just sitting there or working on something else, they really are focused on getting the task done so that they can move on to their other items they have on their plate.
Excellent, excellent. Let's go to another one of the outliers.
Hi, this is Angela. I'm with group number 3. What we were talking about is, again, the various levels of learning. Also, this can be positive and negative, but on the positive side is that if you have somebody at the lower end of the learning, those that are more advanced step up to the plate and help those that are just beginning their education. They'll mentor those, so you see that going on in the classroom. No one's left behind, which I think is a very positive atmosphere within the classroom. Then we also have a multitude of experience being brought into the classroom. As mentioned before, we have real-world experience being brought into the classroom, so that can support the concepts being talked about. The diversity in the classroom is there, not only from, we talked about the demographics, that is part of the diversity, but because they've experienced the world due to the assignments they've experienced, that opens up when we start talking about global organizations. They can bring in their experiences of being assigned throughout the world and how they have had to deal with it. So then these concepts are not just the book says, it's what they've experienced. So the learning becomes richer for them, and it solidifies the concepts being taught.
Ooh, I've got to say that I find these lists very gratifying, because, you know, I had to have my slides done before we started talking. And my worst case scenario was that I was going to hear you guys' lists, and then my stuff was going to go up, and it would be crazy talk. And you guys are nailing it. You guys are absolutely reducing my slides to summary. It's excellent. Have you guys done yours for this breakout yet?
Well, we say the same stuff. In leaders, task-oriented, they tend to be model students because they do what they have to do. They're persistent.
Core values, the core values that they typically bring from just their military training, just regardless of what branch they're from.
I have a question though, because earlier you talked about indoctrination in a way.
Inculcation, yeah.
Inculcation, sorry.
Semantics. I like indoctrination too. It's sinister, but we'll go with it.
So how much of the individuality is lost in that process, and that affects the transition back to civilian life? And how does that manifest in the classroom?
That's a very philosophical question. It's a very socially relevant question. And before answering, I'm going to say this is 7-Rutherford. This is Rutherford's opinion, all right? Because frankly, the real answer resides at a higher intellectual level than I've achieved. But for the most part, at a superficial level, I would say the individuality suffers immensely during inculcation, during indoctrination. But I say superficially. It suffers because we all play Simon Says really, really hard for a couple months, and we normalize our behaviors, yeah? But it's superficial. You don't extinguish the identity of the individual service member when you make them act and dress and groom alike. Your individuality, as you all know, I hope, especially this guy, he watches movies, he's not afraid to say it, that resides at a much deeper level beyond the reach of the man. Yeah? Now, what being inculcated into a superficially uniform culture does do is enhance your ability to stop judging books by their covers. When everyone dresses the same, eats the same, acts the same because they're told to, it strips away a lot of superfluous distractors. What type of car someone drives is no longer relevant. How expensive their shoes are is no longer relevant. How in vogue their style choices are is no longer relevant. And you are forced to base your assessment of yourself and others on your behavior, on your actions. Not only that, but your behavior and your actions when under conditions that most people would describe in technical terms as extremely yucky. In the dark, while you're in danger, and it's hot, and the door is locked, and there's not enough space, and you're claustrophobic, but no one cares. But the guys outside want to hurt you, but you're going to hurt them first. And layers of yuckiness, right? Then you're going to see how people respond and how they act and how they speak and whether or not they care for one another. So in that respect, I would say the individuality, if not enhanced, is more appreciated. And people who are in that environment learn to perceive it more quickly. When we come back into an environment where we're surrounded with superficial distractors, they seem superficial. And that might be a core value. But that's just my opinion.
So it sounds like if we have military students, then it's what you see is what you get, because it's the essence of the person who comes without all the superficial stuff. Largely,
which is not to turn a blind eye to a military learner's ability, just like any other learner, to possess unsuspected depth, to surprise you, to be more or less than they appear. So the individual lives. The unanimity is superficial, at least in this nation's military. Are there any outlying stations that haven't read their list?
Yes.
Please.
So we discussed they bring a different worldview, which is how I put, and I think other people have said this too. We also discussed leadership and being a good leader, that also makes you a good follower too, as you support your leader. Also, we discussed when you are in the military, because of your experiences, you and the culturization that you discussed, they see no color. Everyone is, everyone is everyone. Kind of your analysis there with the uniform. You don't. Everyone is your peer, your equal, and it improves the teamwork. So that's what they bring to the class.
Excellent. Is that all 5 of our outstations? Okay, silence is consent. In the interest of progress, next slide. Commitment. As has been mentioned, this is not the short-term commitment, the let's finish the task. This is the relevance of external professional concerns on your learners. Your ROTC cadets are on a 5-year clock. They have to earn their degree because they want the commission, period. If they don't earn their commission in 4 years, if they don't earn their degree in 4 years, depending on what program brought them into the Reserve Officer Training Corps, they will revert to their service of origin at a lower rank. This is unfortunate and generally frowned upon at the individual level because it corresponds, of course, with lower pay. That being said, other people aren't looking at something as simple as a promotion, but nursing is a good example. Completing your nursing degree can afford you the opportunity to get better jobs within your service, depending on your situation. These students are often laden with decidedly specific and external motivations. That's the commitment that I'm talking about here. Next. Intolerance of impropriety. This university has core values. They're unambiguous. And one of those that we strive to maintain is the freedom of all of our learners to pursue their individual educational agendas free from fear of social injustice in the form of racism or sexism. This is an institution of higher learning in an open democracy. This is less than shocking. In the military, we share these values. However, they're elevated unambiguously from the realm of a value or a goal to an operational necessity. Because if your commanding officer is a different gender than you and you have a problem with that, nobody cares. No one is going to make accommodations for you. You are going to have to adapt or break. If your colleague is a different race than you are and you don't like that, well, so is your subordinate and so are your seniors. You have to get over that little character flaw quickly because no one has time for your shenanigans. It is imperative because we're a blended force. And our emphasis has to be on seamless, effective operation. End of story. This core value is a result of that intense inculcation, indoctrination, if you will. And we are trained to vocalize unambiguous objection when we witness social injustice. Phrases like, that's unacceptable, or you can't touch people like that, come right on out where we come from. In the civilian context, these utterances can have a jarring effect. They can be slightly more confrontational than we're used to. They can disrupt, briefly, the learning environment. I would say that as an instructor, as a teacher, you have to be ready to recognize that event when it happens, that gunshot. That guy, that student just told another student that it was unacceptable to talk like that. That's interesting. Recognize it as a correction of a social injustice and thank the person who said it. Also tell them, thank you, I've got this. Relinquish them of responsibility for resolving the issue. That kind of humor is unacceptable. Thank you, I've got this. He makes a good point. We don't engage in that kind of humor at this university, or we don't give people attaboys as they're coming back from the dry whiteboard at this university. Whatever the corrective measure is, retrieve the baton from the student who pointed it out, take control of the situation. It's very easy. It's very non-confrontational. The military learner will want to relinquish control of the situation to the instructor, acknowledge the validity of the utterance, and move on with the class. It seems like a distractor, but let's take a minute and ponder the implications of the distraction. Maybe some things are worth disrupting the class for. I think social justice is one of those things. I think that one of the best ways to extinguish inappropriate racial or sexist utterances is to correct them vigorously at the moment of execution. Your military learners will help you do that. Just don't leave them in charge of the issue because it's your class. Next. You guys mentioned a sense of urgency. What's the task? You want us to discuss these 3 talking points right here on the board right now? Okay, let's do that. And then the guy or gal gets in the group and the other guy's playing Pokemon Go and the other 2 are arguing about who's going to drive tonight and a million and one things. And your military learner is sitting there saying, yeah, but there's these 3 things written on the board. Yeah, that's great. But there's these 3 things. You can capitalize on that in a number of ways. It's a benefit at the individual level that some students are like that, but it's more beneficial if you recognize it and you are able to leverage it. If you have more than one military learner in your class and you divide into breakout sessions, why don't you make sure that you have one military learner in each group? This stuff is infectious. There are those who dare not argue with this cat when he says, yeah, but what about the 3 talking points? That guy playing Pokemon Go is going to turn the thing off and put it in his pocket and say, yeah, right. It's infectious. You can double tap this benefit. You can leverage it again. It overlaps with another value that military learners embrace, and that is the value of competition. Military learners, by and large, love competition. I was at a meeting the other day where they mentioned, what was the word? Gamifying? Gamification, thank you. Gamification. Capitalize on the latent competitiveness of your military learners. You will increase competition between groups. You will elevate the net level of contribution. You will elevate the level of attention. You will elevate the level of retention if you successfully leverage those learners. Just don't let them start throwing stuff at each other. You do that, you might have crossed too far into the realm of enjoyment, and your learning goals may suffer. These guys are ready to compete. They will encourage your other students to compete. Competition leads to excellence and increased overall output. Next. Willingness to mentor fellow learners. There's obviously a not so latent predisposition for military learners to embrace the notion of teamwork, collectivization, focus, parallel efforts, maybe converging efforts. Yeah, that's intuitively obvious to most people. What's not obvious is that this constant reinforcing of this team ethic, this core value of collectivization, spills into every other level of thinking. Drive your car into a Walmart parking lot and turn on your flashers. Hang out until somebody asks if you need help. And let me know how that works out for you, okay? You'll be there a while, unless you cheat and like park in the entrance. If you're in a regular space, you'll be there a while before anybody gives you the time of day. Now, I dare you to drive onto a military post and do the same thing. I dare you to drive into a military neighborhood near a military post and turn on your flashers. You will be inundated with people asking if you have a cell phone, if there's been an injury, if your vehicle has stopped functioning, if you need a push, a jump, a tow, if the situation is okay, if you are in need of any assistance. It is inculcated. It is darn near automatic. To the military mind, the notion of being able to assist and withholding that assistance is morally reprehensible. It is abhorrent. The casual failure to render assistance to those in need. And this transfers right over to your students, or in the mind of the military learner, their fellow student, their colleague in your class. You see a student suffering, struggling in your class, and you're not sure about the cause. Maybe it's intellectual. Maybe they're having a difficult time balancing life and school. Maybe myriad things. You say to a military student, I think Rutherford is struggling with the course material. I'll bet you about 30% of the time, that is the full extent to which you need pursue the issue. And the military learner to whom you are speaking will, within a class meeting or two, approach Rutherford and ask him or her if they need some kind of help. Quiz them about what the problem is. Ask them if they hate the textbook as much as they do. Just come at the issue sideways. We all know from our experiences that there are a lot of students who can accept help, mentorship, leadership, direction from a fellow student much more easily than from the instructor. Much more easily. If you recognize a military learner's willingness to render assistance, mentorship, laterally, you can capitalize on that with a lot of students who we witness struggling. Next. Readiness to challenge assertions. Contrary to popular belief, immediate execution of a task upon understanding the task is contrary to optimal military operations. We're currently embracing a concept that we refer to as mission command, and I will spare you, and I do mean spare you, a lengthy dissertation about the many splendid, nuanced characteristics of mission command forever and ever, amen. However, I will say that core to the notion is that we're going to give our subordinates instructions, and that during the chaotic execution of those instructions, which frequently happen during the pursuit of a successful military campaign, they will be carried out where parts of the story have changed. It's chaotic. I'm going to tell you to stand guard in front of that building, and the building is gone. Blind obedience would have you standing there guarding the crater. under the tenets of mission command, you're going to know why I wanted you to guard the building. And when the building is gone, you're going to understand that those instructions are null and void, and you're going to seek clarification. That's mission command. You'll recognize the need for critical thinking in that equation. You must question assertions. You should also recognize the centrality of critical thinking to the agenda of this university. This is higher education. It is not training, and it is not basic education. It is higher education. And central to that agenda is critical thought, the aggressive challenging of every assertion, the shaking of the assertion to make sure it is sound before using it as a basis upon which to put other assertions. Cumulative ideas, sequenced notion, chained ideas. Your military students are ready to challenge your assertions. As an instructor, it's important that you recognize that notion and embrace it. If you're talking to that class that looks like a lot of extras from The Walking Dead on August after lunch, I think the president mentioned the AC might not be working well at the town hall meeting. Maybe. And maybe there's some HVAC problems in some of the other campuses, possibly. Your military students are going to rise to that. They're going to challenge your assertions, even in that environment. That's going to energize your class. That is something you can capitalize on. Next. Time and stress management. Self-explanatory. The fact that they are military learners and that they are now not only fulfilling their duties as military learners, but seeking higher education should suggest to you automatically that they have developed time and stress management to an extent that may surpass that of the average student. Next slide. In the interest of brevity, let's go to the next one. Let's look at these 4 variables. Combine those and tell me if it reminds you of any other learner demographic. It's already been mentioned in the strengths that military learners bring. Commitment, urgency, readiness to challenge, and management skills. Who are we talking about? What learners? We're all adults here. Oh, you see what I did there? Yeah. Are all military learners adult learners? No. No, they're not. Some of them are very young and very mature. On the whole, they will exhibit more traits that we affiliate with adult learners than a group of students selected at random from outside that population. The average age of the military student, as defined on the first slide here in Parkville, is 25 to 27. That's regardless of whether they're in undergraduate or graduate level studies. So a lot of these guys and gals are physically older. Simple time results in maturation. But I also point out that they've been in a crucible environment. They've been in a curing, in a kiln. They've been quickening. They might have been deployed. They might have done disaster relief. They might be married. They might have children. They might have gained and lost jobs. They might have done a lot of things that we affiliate with people who are substantially older. Recognizing them as adult learners, recognizing their potential to influence the opinion of other learners, recognizing their ability to enhance aggregate output at the class level, not merely the individual level. That is where you can leverage the potential of these students. Next slide. We talked a little bit about who the military learner is and why they matter. We talked about some of the larger challenges they face. You brought some excellent examples to the list. We talked about some of the strengths that they have. And what I've tried to do during this discussion is focus on what we as instructors can do to mitigate their challenges and leverage their strengths, not just to increase the quality of their learning environment, but to increase the quality of the learning environment for everyone in your class. I started by pointing out to you guys that more than 50% of the men and women who volunteer to serve in the profession of arms do so because they want more access to higher education and that is what you do. You're the guys who serve. Today, it's you guys. Thank you for your service. How much time do we have?
It's exactly 2:01.
I'm 60 seconds beyond my limit. So any questions or comments that anyone utters from this point on are totally in the red. You, living on the edge.
I was just going to say, in my classes, I've noticed that the military students write pretty well, but like depending on which branch they come from, they write differently. Like Marines might do APA better and Air Force might do Turabian better. Those aren't like the real ones, but like it's a little bit different for each branch, and I'm not sure.
I would never want to be overly specific and say something like the Air Force consistently writes the best essays as an aggregate. I would never make a claim like that publicly. It would probably be risky. Okay? I taught command and leadership at Lewis and Clark. I see essay after essay after essay from the different branches, and I'm just saying, if you find yourself in a position to hire a veteran, and part of that job description involves writing, you might want to cross into the blue. That's very real. It's very real. Marines tend to be very demanding of themselves when it comes to the execution, but they lack the prosaic training, the polish of the Air Force. Extremely academic in their focus. Yeah. And the Army, well, largest of the branches. I think we'll just leave it at that. All right. But that's absolutely, if I had time to conduct a genuine research project, there would absolutely be unambiguous trends that would emerge at the service level. Outstations. Is there anything that you feel definitely should have been addressed that we failed to mention? I mean, we've had 90 minutes. This is wave top at best, but still something that we haven't addressed.
I think you're missing benefits of the strengths of the Coast Guards.
There is the Coast Guard. There is the Coast Guard. And you know, it's amazing how many people don't realize that that's a military branch. A lot of people think it's still affiliated with the Department of Transportation, which it was. And it is its own branch. And my problem with speaking about the Coast Guard, I said that you can totally quote me, my problem speaking about the Coast Guard, what? Is that at Command and General Staff College, we didn't get enough of them. So they're sort of under the radar, so to speak. I can't characterize academic performance. But superior. Perhaps even buoyant. I can say this from a non-academic standpoint. My first company command in the Army was a landing craft unit. Those are boats. A guy came to my assumption of command ceremony. He was my next door neighbor. He was a coastie. He looked at those boats and the look of disdain on his face because of the poor, what you would call seamanship, the failure to coil the ropes correctly, the size of the rust stains, the depth of the water in the bilge, the liquid that collects at the low point in the vessel. All of these things. Silent testimony to the fact that as mariners go, coasties got it. They're tight, extremely detail-oriented, no questions. That's it.
No, I would like to add something. There is some information for us in the nursing department on simulations with veterans. And one of the resources that I found is 2 handouts that I'm giving to the students for assessment. And it's interesting that one of them, one's for active duty military, and then one is for working with veterans. So it's the first handout that I've seen that says, may I ask you, or is it okay for me to ask you about your military service? Which, you know, I think a lot of us, and I have, both my husband and I were in the military, and it's the first time, you know, I've seen something worded that way. You know, I think if you see a veteran walking around or anyone, you know, with the Army hat on or something, you just say, "Oh, tell me about your service," versus, "May I ask you, is it okay for me?" Or and so that's just a kind of a different you know, way to different slant on the question. I just thought that was interesting. Then it goes on to say, for all of us females, may I ask you, or may I talk with you about sexual harassment in the military, because that is huge. And then it also points out, you know, different things like blast injuries, because we know all the IEDs that our Iraq and Afghanistan deployed soldiers have been involved in, gives, of course, suicide assessment, and then PTSD, which, you know, is a real thing for anyone who's been in any trauma. And then the veteran handout is very interesting. It talks about, you know, if your soldier served in this time frame, you know, you need to think about Agent Orange injuries, or, you know, and that's, it's just a very unique handout. And it's something I'm glad to be sharing with all my students. So I just want to share that with everyone else. So, you know, when you're working with military soldiers and or veterans in your class, you know, don't just automatically assume they want to talk about their experiences, because it made me think of it differently.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. Would anybody like to add on to that?
Kathy, this is Emily. I was just going to say, if you feel comfortable forwarding those handouts to Jamie or to Betty, we could put them online as resource materials. I mean, even though.
Yeah. Yes, I will. Yeah. 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 They're awesome. They are really awesome.
Yeah. I mean, the concept, I think it would be interesting to look at those and think about how they might apply more generally to the classroom. So thank you. And thank you,
no problem,
Mike, for this presentation.
Folks, we're in the red. We're out of time. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.